Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me on my program. I appreciate you wherever you are connecting from. If you are joining me from any part of the world, I thank you very much for your contributions on this channel. Please kindly subscribe if you have not subscribed, and also click the notification bell so that you'll be notified each time I upload a video. You will be among the first to receive it. In this channel, I bring information to your doorstep. I bring news from all channels, from every angle. Things that have to do about the world, things that have to do about Africa, more especially Nigeria. I bring it to your doorstep, some information that you ignore, some information that you cannot be able to come across. I look for them, I bring it to your doorstep for you to see. Every video you see on this channel is for educational purpose.
The concept of a placeholder that some presidential candidates are resorting to has raised questions on the validity of this move in accordance with the Electoral Act. The presidential candidates of the All Progressives Congress, APC, and the Labour Party, LP, Bola Ahmed Tinubu and Mr. Peter Obi, respectively, have nominated persons as placeholders to stand in temporarily, pending when they will nominate substantive vice presidential candidates. However, political observers and lawyers have condemned this move. INEC also noted that the practice was not recognized within the legal framework of the Constitution. Joining us on the show this morning as we continue the conversation on political parties naming placeholders in order to beat the deadline set by the Independent National Electoral Commission is Inibehe Effiong. Good morning and welcome to the morning show.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, I've seen and I've read your essay in which you were saying that nomination of placeholders is unknown to Nigerian law. And you quoted in extenso Section 31, Section 33, and also supported your submission with cases. AG Federation and Atiku Abubakar, and also the James Faleke case. Well, can you just take us through your submission about the illegality of this invention called the placeholders, and then the risks that you defined in that piece?
Thank you. The concept, the idea of a placeholder is a novel one, as I said in that article. It is an invention of recent origin by politicians and political parties who, confronted with the restrictive time frame set by INEC for nomination of candidates and submission of their names by their parties to INEC, where a few of them, in focus, the APC candidate Bola Ahmed Tinubu, the Labour Party candidate Mr. Peter Obi, they now resorted to putting in place this temporary arrangement where somebody is represented to be a running mate, but in the real sense of it, there is no intention, either on the part of the candidate or on the part of the political party, to sponsor that person for that office. There has to be an intention to sponsor. And that is what Section 221 of the Constitution says, that nobody shall run for office except that person is sponsored by a political party. So the question is Doyin Okupe sponsored by Labour Party? Is there an intention on the part of Labour Party to sponsor him to be Peter Obi's running mate? And the same thing applies to the gentleman nominated by Bola Ahmed Tinubu. The answer is no. There is no intention. But technically speaking, because they have the right to nominate any person that has made the constitutional qualification for office of vice president, one can be deemed to have, they can be deemed to say that they have nominated vice presidential candidates. But the idea of a placeholder, the language itself, the semantics, is unknown to the Constitution. It is unknown to the Electoral Act. And the reason is very simple, as I said. When you look at Section 142 of the Constitution, it states unequivocally that nobody shall run for office of president, contest for office of president, except that person has nominated an associate to run as a vice presidential candidate with him. So that if that person is elected, there would be someone occupying the office of vice president. In other words, you cannot have a presidential candidacy without a corresponding vice presidential candidacy. Both has to go pari passu. So when they now say they are putting in place a placeholder, there is no place for anybody to hold. It is either you are vice presidential candidate simpliciter or you are not a vice presidential candidate. But what is the way out? The Electoral Act, for example, the first part, Section 31 of the Electoral Act, right, allows for withdrawal of candidacy. and sets condition for which withdrawal can take place, namely that the candidate must withdraw in writing and personally submit that letter of withdrawal to his political party. And his political party must go ahead to notify INEC within 14 days. You go forward and you look at section 33. That gives allowance for substitution. But I must caution that under the new Electoral Act 2022, substitution is expressly prohibited, except on 2 grounds: by reason of death or by reason of withdrawal. So what these people are doing, they are emphasizing that the person so nominated would withdraw. And there are insinuations that, oh, they could have even obtained written withdrawal letters before their names were put forward. But if that is the case, then it has to be followed through the process. Remember what has happened to the man Machina, the man who ran for the Yobe seat with the Senate president. Yes, it is stated in a section of the media that he was a placeholder for the Senate president. And then he got into the primaries and won. By the time Ahmed Lawan now changed his mind and said, I want to run for Senate, the man said, look, there is no place for you to take over. I am the candidate of the party. So the danger in this is that if the Kupe, for example, says tomorrow, I do not have any intention of withdrawing.
Why are you all attacking Dr. Okupe this morning? No. Before you were finished, Dr. Okupe, you too, Dr. Okupe.
No, I'm just using him to set an example that, that if any of these so-called placeholders, right, decide that they want to stay in the ticket, there is nothing that the presidential candidates can do. They cannot substitute them. They cannot change them. They must follow through the process. So that is what the law says. There is no allowance for substitution except by death or withdrawal, and the criteria for withdrawal has been set by law. The only saving grace for them is that in the place of vice presidential candidate and deputy governorship candidate, for you to substitute, you do not need to hold fresh election. Because vice presidential candidacy is bettered. It arises from presidential candidacy. It is the presidential candidacy that gives birth to vice presidential candidacy. Unlike gubernatorial position or presidential position, that primary has to be held in compliance with Section 84 of the Electoral Act. That is the only saving grace. If there was an allowance for primary to be held for producing a vice presidential candidate, nobody will be talking about placeholders. So we must also caution the political parties not to set a bad precedent. If you want to run for president, in as much I understand the political climate, the need for balancing the negotiations that are going on, political parties must take this matter seriously. And because if you are running for office of president, you should have had in mind who you want to be your running mate. You should have had in mind. It should not be based on conjecture. It should not be based on what could happen, the unforeseen. There should be clarity of thought on who should run as your running mate. That clearly has not been the case. It has not been the case, particularly the case of the APC presidential candidate. You know, Peter Obi may be excused because he just got into Labour Party. Tinubu has been, he has openly declared it is his lifetime ambition to be president. So it should not be difficult, yes. It should not be difficult for him to say who he wants to be his running mate. It should not be difficult. What is the consultation that they are talking about? Who are you consulting?
Right, with regards to John Kupe, these are the benefits and burdens of being a household name. We all just reach for his name very easily. And it's a huge compliment, I think. In Ibehe, already the stage is set, or I hope, for future Electoral Act amendments. This lacuna is one that could be closed. What else have you observed since the primaries, since the Ekiti elections, with regards to the Electoral Act that should be tightened?
For me, I believe the greatest threat today to our electoral process is this abominable criminality of vote buying. The situation where politicians and parties pretend that they are going into an electoral contest, like we have seen in Ekiti. And then on the day of the election, you have people going to the polling booth to share money to the voters, which is an electoral offense. Inducement of voters, buying of votes is a criminal offense. So the question for INEC, the question for the leadership of this country, the question for the police is, as of today, how many persons have been arrested on account of vote buying? I saw the drama, the comic display that EFCC did during the APC presidential primary, where they went there, with their camouflage, and they pretended. I said, what are these people doing? If you want to share money to delegates, is it at the Eagle Square that you would share? You would have traced where the money is coming from. And we saw the same thing in Ekiti, where they were chasing after people. This is just comic relief. Nigerians know that as of today, there is no political will to stop the criminal practice of vote buying. So we must find a way to address that. And what is the way out? We need an electoral offenses commission. INEC is already overburdened. INEC is already saddled with more responsibility than it can attend to. INEC needs to be given the leverage. We need an independent body that will specifically have a mandate to punish those who corrupt our electoral system. And of course, regarding the primary election process, if you look at what Section 84 of the Electoral Act has done, which has now, to some extent, sought to address some of the imbalances that we saw in the 2010 Electoral Act. Now, that has also, again, come with its own challenges, right? Because now, when you look at the process for selection, the idea of consensus, for example, where, as we heard about the APC, candidates were given forms to even withdraw in advance in order to allow consensus. Because what is consensus? Consensus is we are all at them. We are all in agreement. I have always objected to the idea of having consensus in the electoral process. So I believe that the new electoral act should totally expunge that. We have tested it. It has failed. The APC primary is a good example. You saw how people were crying. Tundung, you saw it. You saw how people came out and they were crying that they were being forced to withdraw under duress. So consensus has not worked in the real sense. We also saw it during the presidential primary of the APC again, where some people pretended to be contesting, like my former governor, Akpabio. I mean, he was never interested in being president. Akpabio had no intention. Come on, he had no business running for president. And they now went and bought the form. And on the day of the primary, people came out and said, oh, we are handing over our delegates, even delegates that they did not have. So this is the thing I'm talking about. If the law says in direct primary, let the process be credible. Let the process be transparent. As that today, INEC has no ability to monitor what political parties are doing. It has done to some extent, but largely INEC is not able because the functions are just too many. We need to unbundle INEC. We also need to look at the efficiency of INEC in terms of manpower, in terms of training. Look at PVC registration. It is a colossal failure. Yes, there was a time for Nigerians to register, but because the Electoral Act still gives time for people to register before election, you can now see the total system failure, that you have millions of Nigerians possibly, potentially, indicating interest to register. And INEC just does not have the manpower. INEC just does not have the machine, the equipment. What does that portend? It is a message to Nigerians that if care is not taken, these same challenges we are facing with PVC will be replicated during the general election. So these are challenges that we must pay attention to. If INEC is not able to register the number of persons who are showing interest to register, will they have the capacity to hold election?
Okay. I mean, anyway, great insight you've shared this morning. But I'd like to ask you this. Number one, you said, let's go back to that Uwais Commission report about electoral reforms, because all the things you're saying are in there. The question a lot of people have always asked is, who will pay for it? How will INEC be able to pay for it? How will the government be able to pay for it? Even because with this process, they still complain that it's a whole lot of money. Secondly, I'd like to ask you, what do you think about the Ekiti elections? For the very first time, a lot of people say we had some level of transparency, that as they voted in every polling unit and the results were made available, it was transmitted across the INEC server, and we could even watch it live on television. And for the very first time, we could even start to make election projections, which has never been the case in Nigeria. What's your read on that? A good one for Nigeria? A positive thing? Or you think that there might be a day that the result that will come out from the collection center will be different from the one you're seeing on the screen and making projections of?
The positive thing, one of the good things about the 2022 Electoral Act is the legal allowance for the use of technology in our elections. And the history for this is very clear. We had a situation in 2015 where INEC introduced regulations that made the use of the smart card reader compulsory for accreditation. And then the election held. We saw a situation where, again, for example, in my state, Akwa Ibom, we had barely 400,000 accredited voters. But then miraculously over 1 million people were said to have voted. And then we went to the tribunal, there was evidence of overvoting, but the Supreme Court said, well, yeah, if you have proof of overvoting, but because the Electoral Act does not make the use of card reader compulsory, people still have the right to resort to manual accreditation. So what the Ekiti election has shown is that we must, in fact, now the conversation should be about electronic voting. That is where we should be heading as a country. We must, because what will that even do? Look at the concept of vote buying, for example. If I can sit in the comfort of my house and vote, it is definitely going to reduce the rates at which voters are induced. It will give voters greater power to determine who they want to choose. So I believe strongly and I support entirely the concept of electronic transmission, the concept of electronic transmission of results. It should be electronically transmitted. So that has given some level of credibility to the process. But as I said, irrespective of the reforms that we put in place in terms of legislation, except we address the conduct of politicians and political parties, we are just wasting our time. I mean, you have a situation, look at Ekiti, it is reputed to be the state that has the highest number of professors in Nigeria. Very literate state, climate, and you have this kind of reports, even the video that we saw, where people just simply went out, sharing up to 10,000 per voter. This is money that could have been used to construct roads, used to equip hospitals, used for human capital development, and yet politicians will keep this money for the purpose of corrupting the electoral process. So I do not believe that an election that is induced by money is a credible election. Because what is the credibility? If at the end of the day, the choice is not made willingly, the choice is induced, that is not a credible election. That is not a credible election. So we must ask, and I saw a video where policemen were said to have even aided the sabotage of the electoral process.
But a lot of people argue with you, Nebe, that the fact that Ekiti has a lot of professors doesn't mean it's a very literate state. So the number of professors you have doesn't translate to literacy, really. And that's what you saw out there, because the people that were collecting money were people that predominantly were stricken by poverty, didn't know their left from their right, and were largely uneducated people. That's another argument.
Maybe literacy is not the issue.
Yeah.
Maybe enlightenment
is the issue, yeah.
Is probably the issue. But anyway, let's interrogate this, your point, about traditional bureaucracy, unbundling INEC, as you suggested. Well, that will translate into cost and further, leakages within the system. But I took that from the comment you made earlier. But about the Electoral Offences Commission, the law, as it is, the Electoral Act, sections 114 to 121, gives INEC powers to deal with electoral offences. Section 145 further empowers INEC to deal with electoral offences. But you say INEC is overpowered. Is INEC truly helpless? And then again, talking about the Electoral Offences Commission, Femi Falana, SAN, wrote a letter to the Speaker of the House of Representatives, drawing his attention to the fact that the Senate, in November 2021, passed a bill on Electoral Offences Commission in line with general recommendations dating back to the Waste Commission. But that up till now, the House of Representatives has not acted on that. And Falana SAN is threatening to go to court, to a federal high court, to seek an application, to apply for an order of mandamus to compel the House of Representatives to act accordingly. So what are the issues here? Do you think just passing the bill will solve the problem? Do you insist that additional bureaucracy will solve the problem?
Clearly, because, Dr. Matthew, when you say INEC has the power to prosecute, let INEC come out with a list of electoral offenders that they want to prosecute from the Ekiti election. Let us see. I mean, that is the only way to debunk what I'm saying. Since 2015, how many people have been put on trial? How many political thugs have been arrested? How many police officers have been dismissed on account of aiding criminality on the day of election? How many soldiers who were involved in the madness that we saw in Rivers State, where soldiers were seen to have compromised the electoral process, how many of them were sanctioned? So the problem is lack of political will. The problem is also that clearly we do not have any institution today that is willing to address the issue of electoral reform. But I do agree with Mr. Femi Falana, because really you need the concurrence of both chambers for a bill to be said to be passed. But we must also understand the people we are talking to. We are talking to people whose membership, an assembly whose membership, many of whom are beneficiaries of the decay and the flaw in the system. I mean, that explains the hesitancy, because what is their excuse? What is their excuse? When it concerns them, like when they needed direct primaries, when they wanted to make it compulsory. We saw the issue of statutory delegates. We saw how excited, how passionate the National Assembly was. When their interest is at stake, they act differently. We clearly need an Electoral Offences Commission, because what history has taught us is that INEC does not have what it takes, or is just so infused with so much responsibility that it just cannot prosecute electoral offenses. And I don't want to talk about the police. We know the police that we are talking about. I mean, you cannot ask an electoral offender to prosecute an electoral offense. More often than not, the police are complicit in electoral offenses. We know the role they play. We have seen several examples of this, even in Ekiti. How many policemen have been arrested? The political leadership is simply not there, and this is tragic. For a president who promised electoral reform, nothing has been done. So if INEC is saying that they have what it takes to prosecute electoral offenses, let them use Ekiti as an example to tell politicians and political parties that, look, this conduct will not be tolerable in 2023. Come out with a list. Show all the people you want to arraign in court. Except that is done, they are just, pretending that they can do this. We know that INEC has too much responsibilities. So clearly, I believe Justice Uwe's electoral report, there was wisdom in that recommendation, because they had studied history. They had clearly seen that electoral offenses or prosecution of electoral offenders is something that requires some level of independence. It requires an independent body, because here is the point. In every election, whether general election or by-election or supplementary election, Nigerians will be looking up to that commission. Let us see whether they are living up to their mandate. Let us see how many people they are going to arrest. Let us see how many people they are going to prosecute. But again, the EFCC also has a role in this. The money that is used to induce voters, where does the money come from? We have seen how hard it has been lately to get dollars from banks. We have seen these politicians have completely taken all the dollars in the country. Nobody will tell me that if the Nigeria Financial Intelligence, agency is interested in tracing where this money came from, or EFCC is genuinely interested, not the drama we saw, just going out with camera and saying, and be checking back, looking for dollar. Who does that? That is not how to look for criminals. They were just, entertaining Nigerians. If they genuinely want to know where these funds came from, they know how to go about it. They have the machinery. They have the manpower.
Okay, on that note, we would like to thank you very much, Inibe Effiong. I didn't know that your knowledge scope also includes how to hide the dollars. Thank you for joining us.
Tinubu will pick his president, the vice president from the south, because that is a question of region. So we expect that he will pick the vice president from the north, and a Christian, because religion is one of the dividing lines.